So today we're going to start working on this Reaper Bones dice holder. This is one of the Rocky figures. They come in all sorts of different poses and playing with stuff. They have a brush holder version. This one we're going to try a new technique. So I've seen some people talking about like a 3-color airbrush base and then working from your base color to your true color. So we're going to start with Monarch Purple for our shadow areas, a Warlord Purple for where our highlight areas are going to be, and then a Prussian Blue for our off color, so in the scales and in the wings, things like that. But more treating it like a lighting source and less like a base color. So I got my Monarch Purple mixed in to my airbrush, about a 50-50 mix. And I'm going to start shooting in my shadows. I used a white primer because I want my colors to be vibrant. I want them to be fully saturated, and I don't need a black to desaturate them. Anywhere I think that I want this to be my shadow tone, I'm going to add it. And then punch it up. Almost like a controlled reverse zenithal. Hit a thin spot in the paint. I'm going to hit a lot of this blocking here because we're going to be painting it up as well. Sometimes that'll happen when you're airbrushing. You'll hit a spot where the paint gets a little bit thinner, especially with a paint that has a heavier pigment. That's okay. This is just a base color. I'm not super worried about anything. Just don't want it to run. Alright, so next I'm going to mix up some of my magenta. And we're going to layer that on. So now I got a 50-50 of my Warlord Purple and thinner in my airbrush. A little test spray. And I'm going to start layering that where I think the highlight should go. And keep in mind, this is the base for a red dragon. So we're going to be painting this as a red dragon. It's going to be a very vibrant red dragon. And I'm going to go back with my blue, and I'm going to hit kind of the intersections between the purple and the magenta with that blue, and treat it as a third light source. So it's okay if I cover all the white, because that blue will coat really well. And I'll come back and hit some areas on my base too, just to make sure we're getting some light source on there. That way everything's painted. I'm going to take a closer look at this off camera and hit all the spots that I'm missing. So now we're going to take our Prussian Blue, and to recant on what I said last time, I'm going to use this as more of a third light source for the model. I've picked this direction, and so whatever that hits will be my third. Again, like a zenithal, but I'm choosing to hit a specific area on the figure, like it was lit with some sort of blue light. Again, as a strong contrast to the red that it will be. So now we have our blue on from one direction, and that picked up on a lot of neat little areas. Just reinforce it just a little bit. And so now we have our light source going in, almost like a little techno dragon at the moment. But now we're going to go in and mix those base colors and increase the highlight areas, the areas of interest that we want. Using these base colors and working up to our natural reds with both the magenta and the blue. So before we start painting, we're going to hit it with a matte varnish. Alright, so currently, and I'm playing with it a little bit, I'm working with the red from Chimera and a rosy flesh, just these two colors, and I'm building up areas of highlight on only the magenta areas. So if I have a half blue, half sort of magenta area, I'm leaving the blue area alone and just hitting the magenta with a solid red, leaving my magenta in the shadow or the crack areas or toward like the heavier bottoms of a shape. As you can see here a little bit better because it isn't blended as much. And I'm going to work all the magenta areas that way until I get to the purple, and then I'm going to start adding a little purple to my red just to ease the transition of color. But I'll have an example for that once I work through this, so see you in a little bit. This is quick update on the process. Adding more red areas, trying out some of the magenta to tan on the inside of the wings here. I'll go over that more as I evolve what I'm doing. But just basic layering, really. Layering while mixing your base colors into your other colors. I got the red here with the blue and the shadow, and it really does make it look like that red is in shadow, and then this is in like a really bright light. So as we're moving along, we're shifting more to that red dragon look. I've started to lay in basically my reds here, pure reds on top of the magenta, and I'm using like a 50-50 mix of purple and this red in the darker areas here, and keeping volume in mind and how much light would be hitting these areas as I'm going through and painting them or hitting them. And you know, a combination of using thinner paints, thinner brush strokes, and finding the comfortable spots to hit all these scales. But again, it's a pretty new thing that I'm trying here. I feel like I have a decent knowledge of light and shadow, and I try to get more color in my miniatures. This is definitely a way to do it. It's very colorful so far. And then here, like this section, see if I can, what I'll do, see, this is like a brighter section that's receiving a little more light. I mix up a little bit of that rosy skin tone and start highlighting up the areas and maybe like consolidating the highlights to some regions as I work. And I'm going to go in and hit the blue and everything just to sort of my brain is really fighting what's going on right now, and I'm trying to push through that and trust the process. And sometimes we just have to do that and see what the end result will be. At this point, I've been working the reds up through the blue, making sure that I have more volumetric highlights here. Now I'm going to increase this red with my rosy flesh over the neck area, leave these. You can see the highlights get really thin toward just the top of the scales, so it's a matter of keeping the volumetric highlight on the scale as well as like the overall highlight and developing that. I've gotten my reds developed back in here, so I'm going to start developing this area a little bit more than the other areas, and again adding some rosy flesh over here. And coming up, I'll start really brightening up these scales just to draw the eye toward the head, because that's kind of the focal point, or will be eventually. And then going back and blending some areas and, I don't know, leaving it a little bit painterly as we go. But I'm going to make this area pretty bright here on the neck, kind of bright like it is like on the leg and the elbow. Update on the process. So now I've worked in my highlights along the body, and you can see I progressively get brighter as I come up into that sort of straight down visual plane for lighting. These scales catching the edge of some of the brighter light. Haven't used any white. I've only gone up to rosy flesh as sort of my brightest color. And now I'm going to start working across the face, adding my darker tone areas in here from the blue light coming in, and start working these reds in. And this is going to be probably going to add some yellow to my rosy flesh and work it to white on some of the highlights on the face, just so we draw the attention there in on the face. But again, it's a lot of work. We picked a model with scales, and highlighting every single one of them is fun. So I've highlighted this side of the face up pretty high, a big majority of rosy flesh. Now I want to add some yellow and some white to that. I guess I need to shake it up. So I'm adding some yellow, and then grabbing just a pure white. And then I'm going to take some of this rosy flesh, add yellow, and then brighten it up. This will be the highlight for like the higher parts of our scales here, just to add some warmth and some brightness into it. And I'm trying to hit those areas that would be most affected by light and draw attention to them at the same time. So they're on the brow, and you can see those areas really start to stand out even from a distance now. You gotta be real careful with this color, because you can overdo it really quick. I'm just trying to hit the areas that make sense. Maybe 2 highlights on this side instead of 4, and then this little cheek just a little bit. We still have that undercolor showing through from our light source there. And then we're gonna do black on the horn. Still got a lot of scales to go. Been working on this sucker for about 3 or 4 hours now. And then the wing webbing, got to finish that up on both sides, and then belly scales, which will be about the same tone as the wing scales. But as I get to different points and as I finish things up, I'll keep checking in with you guys. So now that we got all our reds in and highlighted and up with the rosy flesh tone, I am going to lay a filter over this with a little bit of yellow, just to bring those highlights more into an orange look. Reason to do this is I'm thinking it's still looking a little bit pink, and the order was for a red dragon. Filters are also just a good After Effects way to adjust colors if you've already got highlights built up So to do that, I'm going to airbrush a little bit of yellow ink onto it. I'm doing this before I finish out any of my scale work too, because I want that to be more neutral. I don't want it to look red. So I'm going to go real light, start out with. Make sure I'm on the right pressure, because it's always a little bit nerve-wracking when you airbrush finished work. Yeah, it's really bringing out the color. And I know I put yellow in my highlights up here, but they're just going to be even brighter with that filter applied. And shifting the red a little bit orange, which is okay. We can still use some red ink to punch our red. I'm going to try to hit this with this yellow without really touching my wing as much, because I had some finished wing segments there. I'm going to go back under here with my blue. Now it's going to make my blue a little bit green, because blue and yellow make green. But that's okay. Still colorful. I didn't have any green in there to begin with. That's giving me some natural progression into other color hues. He's looking more like a red dragon now. And then I'm going to get the red and hit a few spots. Again, just a filter, but I'm liking that a whole lot more. We still got that strong magenta undertone and the kind of lighting effect of things shifting in and out of shadow. As a, like in the snout here, these areas are interesting, they're fun. And then we can go in and address eyes on horns and things. Alright, I got my red ink added to my airbrush. I'm using the Vallejo red. A little test. And again, just a filter in some spots to punch that red. You see, I'm not losing my transitions. I would if I went super heavy. I'm not. I'm just filtering it, pushing it toward that red a little bit more. You'll see those highlights move a little more orange as we go. Just got to be real sensitive with this, because you don't want to blow out your highlight. But I like that a lot more as a red dragon. Shifted it away from the pink. I think maybe I left too much pink behind. Maybe I was a little too strong with the pink. But we can always adjust. And it still has that feel, that lighting effect. And then we have to go in and paint the base, of course, and we're going to pick some complements for that. But now I'm going to move on to the horns. For the horns, I'm going to go with a little bit of a desaturated element, just to draw in the eye a little bit more, because it's so prominent on the head. So I'll do the horns and claws, and the little claws on top of the wing, so at least have balance in that sense, with a little bit of muted purple black. So the way I do that, I mix a lot of colors. It saves time looking for colors. And this is the monarch purple. So what I can do is layer up. I'm not going to layer up all the way to white, but I'm going to use white. So I'm going to take this. You won't even see much of that purple once it's mixed into the black. And then I take some of my white, and that's where you'll see a little bit of that purple tone affecting the the color. So I'm going to start by applying just a base black to the entire horn, and I'm going to leave these cracks with their parent colors. Now it looks like we're being invaded, so I'll see you in the next step. Got my black on all my claws and horns. Now I've got mixed up my first layer of highlight. And I'm just applying that in incremental layers toward the high points. And keeping in mind shape, I'll probably apply this everywhere and then wait for lighter colors to start doing volumetric shades. And stay on screen. You can see here I've done a very subtle layer. I'm going to apply that to all the horns. Just to make it more difficult on myself, I'm adding striations on these horns because they're kind of flat and boring. So I'm going in and just pulling little bitty lines to add some detail, and we'll highlight those up. Because usually dragon horns have those sort of patterning to them. I want to make sure that this little guy isn't left out. So I've layered up about 3 layers of this patterning on the horns, and I'm going in and just doing a little, like almost like little dot highlights to show that the edges aren't even, that they're growing out of each other, that there's little protrusions and that. Just again adding more interest to these sort of bland horns. They needed some more detail, and then just brightening up the tips of some of these little face spikes. So now I want to address the mouth, the tongue specifically. So I'm going to take some of this watery red, and I'm going to go for like a really pink, not using that flesh tone, going for a desaturated pink for the tongue, and then carefully get in there just so it's a different tone than the skin. I'm probably going to finish this off camera so I don't end up hitting all my scales. But a couple layers of that, and then I'm going to highlight it up, and we're going to add a Drucci Violet wash and then re-highlight after that. I mixed up 2 progressive layers of pinks, and then I added some like little dots for some tongue texture in there, and now I'm going to let that dry and add some wash. I added that Drucci Violet down in there. You can see it's still wet, but it really does give some nice definition to the mouth. So I'm going to use that around the eye as well, because I want to have this eye look very cut in and be very striking. It's okay if it seeps into the scales just a little bit. I'll just draw in, so now you can see we get that nice outline of the eye. And I'm using a liner brush for this. Liner brushes work excellent for washes. They soak up a lot of wash and they unload almost like a fountain pen. I might go ahead and do the nostrils as well, just to add some definitions, and then like kind of wipe it off on my hand and just fade it in, just so we get a little bit of darkness back in those nostrils. They're pretty bright. Yeah, like that. And then once all that dries, we can go ahead and put a eye color on. While that wash is drying, I'm going to take some of my khaki. So this is the Vallejo khaki and the Vallejo Warlord Purple. Do just a little bit into my khaki for my base layer. I'm going to treat these belly scales kind of like I treated the horns. See how they have that texture in it? I'm going to paint all the way up to this intersection. And then again, using layers, we just progressively highlight these up and keep that texture going. And then I'm going to connect, sort of give the object definition just on the outside edge and toward the middle. So you almost got like a really long W connecting your shapes. Got our hand pads blocked in and wings. I'm going to go back and do the back of these kind of like I did the scales with the red. The tongue we've highlighted with a little bit of our pink color down here. Next, I'm gonna move on to the eye just because it's fun, and I want to have some fun. I'm gonna use the dark flesh as my mixing color because eyes aren't white; they are flesh colored. I'm using a little bit more of a yellowy flesh. Might drop some shadow into the eyes. Chibi eyes are always fun to work on because they're big. You can get to them, and you can do some fun stuff. I'm gonna base coat with this. Probably gonna take a couple coats, and in between those coats, while that's drying, I'm gonna mix up a brighter version of this color for our belly plates and start layering up our belly plates. I've got 2 layers, maybe 2.5 layers of this flesh tone mixed with the white on the eye, so I'm pretty happy with how thick that is. I'm gonna go in and add some blue to that mixture and shade the back side of the eyes here because I want to add some volumetric shading, and then add some white and pull up the center like I'm shading a sphere. And then I have another layer of this khaki pure over our mix of khaki down here on our objects, just again building up kind of the volumes and the shading, and then the striations in the wings. Decided I'm going to leave the back side of the wings this color because it's kind of interesting. I went in and painted these spines black, and I'll highlight them up in the same way that I've highlighted these guys up. I kind of left those out, and I got the fin here, or the sail on the back of his neck, that same sort of tan color. But we're getting there. Oh yeah, and the teeth. Teeth are going along the same route as all these other sort of tan areas. So just to illustrate how I would paint the shadow in that eye, I'm going to take some of the Prussian Blue, since we've already been using that, add a little bit over here. That was a lot of bit. This is why palette control helps. I'm just going to mix that in there because I don't want a dark shadow. I'm going to go in here on the back side of this eye and just cool it down a little bit. Again, this is a thin paint mixed with the blue, so coverage isn't going to be the best, but you see how that's adding a little bit of volume to the eye. Now if I go in, I'm going to add some white, and I go toward the center of the eye, add in a highlight toward the high point where our light source is coming in. Again, that eyeball is getting more of a rounded shape. Now I can go in and add a few more layers and clean this up a bit because the eyes are really the focal point, so I want to make sure we spend a little bit more time on them. So here you can see I built up the volume of my eye and blended out the blues a little bit darker shadow on this one. Now it's iris placement, which I am going to do off camera because I'm trying to think if I want forward facing eyes, almost like a predator, or to go into the middle of the eye. Might make him look like he's looking in 2 different directions. So I'll probably go for like an upper forward sort of look since he's laying on his back and looking at the dice, playing with it. Quick tip for marking out your eyes. Just don't use a black to start out with because you're going to overcorrect too much. I use a little bit of color for my base tone. I'm just going to show you how it's like it marks. It's still like easy enough to see, but it'll give you that control, and then you won't have to adjust over a black or try to cover up a black because you'll end up getting really clumpy with your brush strokes, and that'll look bad in the eye. So you can see here I use dots to place where the eye's going to be, and then I drew a circle around it, and then I'm going to fill that in or outline it with the black and then fill it with my primary color, which is going to be a kind of an icy blue. So now I have the rough placement of my eyes, and now I'm going to take this Prussian Blue and just fill in this area just to get a feel to see if I need to adjust before I commit to shading anything. I want to see how he's looking at me. Got one eye there, looking pretty good. That there, starting to look pretty cute. So now that I got my eyes blocked in, I'm going to start highlighting it up, and I want to do so with a little bit of mint green. I'll take it up in the kinda that almost turquoise realm. So mix up a pretty strong highlight, and then I'm going to do this right under the brow, but not touching the brow, so that we leave this dark shadow there. And just go ahead and fill in almost the whole rest of the eye except for the very bottom. Like that. And I'm going to work up progressive highlights, adding more of that mint green. Just give it more of that icy look. If I used white, it would desaturate it without keeping it in that color range or adding like a little bit more of that turquoise. Alright, I got the pupils in just with a black. Pick the center point and just kind of expand out from there. From here, I'm going to use my pure mint to just add some ticks around the eye to represent that iris. I'll try and capture that on screen here for you. I'm going to do the rest of these off camera because it's hard to hold it there. But that way you get that nice kind of iris look with the segments in the eye. Added in highlights on the eye here after I finished my ticks. These are just little orbs. They really punch when you have them overlapping some of the black area, so try to pick a high spot or a spot that's natural where your light source would be from and add those dots according. So here I have it, both of them interacting with the iris, and then here pupil and iris. Also, to give environmental effect, if you're painting a highlight in an eye that's large like this and you have the opportunity, if you want to give the feeling of inside, paint square highlights instead of round. So I took an Agrax Earthshade and added it around the base. This is going to give me a little bit more time to layer up my tans. I'm going to take my tan, mix it with a little bit of white, and build up, and then do one more layer after that. So 4 total layers to get up to our final highlight. Again, keeping volumetrics in mind while I'm highlighting those up. And I might do one more pass of Earthshade. I kind of want to naturalize the ground a little bit more, but we'll see how this dries. So I went back and added progressive highlights. I've been keeping volume and getting kind of small and very sparse with the last few highlights. Added to the teeth here. Oh, forgot the sail at the back of the head, so I can show you.
This was that guy.
Just a little bit here and there. Give it some accent. I want it to have almost a softer, almost pastel look. Or I do. There. Awesome. And now all we gotta do is address the grass. So to address the green for the grass, I'm gonna use this light green RLM 82, one of the model color air colors. Kind of a mid-tone, a little bit thinner. I'm going to thin it down even more with just some water. Dry my brush just a little bit, and then see how that, it's kind of beading up on this grass. Might need a thicker paint. I don't want it to kind of wad up in there. Might have to airbrush it. Yeah, I think I'm going to move to something different. Okay, the other color that I picked for my highlight actually coats a lot better. It's the model color green gray. I guess the air paint was too thin for that. I'm not sure. Never had it coat like that before, but we learn and adjust. This is learning for me. As far as using these colors. I'm not trying to get too globby or anything like that. Just kind of evenly distributing that green around on the little tufts. I'll push down in there. Again, leaving some of that color. I'm just trying to break up some of my globbier areas. But this paint's acting normal on the color here, so now you almost got like a burnt grass look. Now take around this other tuft on the other side. Now they might be asking, why did you just use green tufts? It's like, well, I wanted that kind of purpley magenta in the color of the tuft. I wanted to paint them. That's pretty heavy, so I'm going to let that dry. And then I'm going to take mud brown, dirt brown. Let me find it. Found it. Beastie brown. A little bit of that. Grab one of my dry brushes. Make sure it doesn't have a bunch of metallic on it. And then I want to dry brush these desiccated earth panels a bit more. I'm aiming to kind of hit the high points, just to add some natural tone down here on the ground, leaving that really cool magenta and purple down there. So this is giving us more of a naturalistic base. I'm trying not to, because these desiccated little panels, if you scratch at them too much, can pop off. I don't want that to happen, so be sort of gentle with it, let the paint do its thing. Take a little bit of white, and then just over here on the front of the base, I'm gonna brighten it up just a little bit more. Kind of that light source area where it's brighter. These are just little finishing touches. My green here. Add a little bit of yellow. My gray green, just to brighten it up a little bit for highlights at the top of this here. Just drag along the top. See how that's highlighting the top of that grass up? That warm yellow really pops at the end of the blades of grass there. And then lastly, we need to finish out the base ring, and then we're going to do a matte varnish on it, and it will be done. So I'm using some of my Chimera black. I know, a waste for a base ring, but I really like how it coats. It just cleans up the figure. Aiming the brush from below, just so it doesn't have a opportunity to hit the upper areas. Be careful on the grass. Just keep moving around. Kind of sets the scene, cleans it up as an object, gives us that final look. Wait for that to dry and do one more coat, but I think we're looking pretty cool here. I'm gonna have to go test it with a D20.